So this time I have segment 4, and segment 4 starts with hallucinogenic and dissociative drugs altering sensory perception. So before it talks about a lot of other drugs like cannabinoids and opioids and stuff like that that alter the way you might move or how fast your heart might go or things like that, like different things. But hallucinogens alter the sensory perception and produce peculiar experiences, so colors and things like that. They distort existing perceptions. They don't create new things like some like actual hallucinations do. So you see intense colors, and a lot of times you're aware that these aren't real events, but they still create these things. So some popular hallucinogens include LSD, mescaline, which is also called peyote, and psilocybin, which is also called magic mushrooms, and those are the ones that lead to visual experiences. So hallucinogens affect numerous areas of the brain and the body. So they can affect opioid kappa receptors like salvia does, which is another hallucinogen. They can affect acetylcholine receptors like muscarine does, and they can also affect neurogenic and serotonergic systems. So, like mescaline affects your norepinephrine and serotonin like receptors. So many are serotonin receptor agonists that reduce activity in the medial prefrontal cortex and anterior cingulate cortex, inhibiting the limbic emotional processing regions. So it's what leads to the euphoric state some people feel on when they're on these drugs like LSD, like the free feeling of like an out of body experience. So another popular uh, drug that's called a dissociative drug is PCP or phencyclidine. So I'm sorry that I'm pronouncing all of this stuff wrong because it's difficult. And it's a dissociative drug developed as an analgesic and anesthetic, so it's meant to calm you down and make you not feel pain, but it produces feelings of depersonalization and detachment from reality. So another, again, out of body experiences. But the problem is that this can cause catatonia, which is like basically being stuck in one spot. It's a very common in schizophrenics, and it also causes combativeness, so making you violent. And it's the experimental model for schizophrenia due to its similarity to the psychosis that you experience that. And it's an MDMA agonist, so it affects your MDMA receptors. So another NMDA antagonist is ketamine, which is used as a dissociative anesthetic agent. So it's used to make you come out of your body and feel things. And then there's MDMA, or ecstasy as it's called, is it increases serotonin levels and changes levels of dopamine and certain hormones like prolactin. And the side effects are memory disturbances. You might not be able to remember things like this, but it's a possible therapy for post-traumatic stress disorder, which makes it very like common in research and very like something that's going to be popular over the next couple of decades with people coming back from wars that experience PTSD. So the problem with the drugs that we've talked about is a lot of drug abuse. So drugs can be powerful in the way that they help you like anesthesically, making you be able to relax and things like that. But when abused, it's difficult to stop and difficult to control. So drug abuse is challenging because it's hard to identify a single reason why the substance is so addicting. So some reasons include that it's a local anesthetic. It makes the pain go away, and people like to not feel pain. Other people experience intense pleasure from things like that. So LSD causes intense pleasure for some people and like makes their mind go great places and things like that. Others like it because it's a psychomotor stimulant, so it makes you be able to do things longer. So the way that cocaine is able to make people stay up and act and do things for longer times, or like meth, as it was used for things where you needed to be combative and alert for long periods of time. Others feel intensely rewarding sensations, like we said before, and the other is powerful withdrawals. So, like heroin has very powerful withdrawals that can lead to you clawing your skin off and stuff like that. Um, and there's several perspectives to help us try to understand drug abuse because it's hard. It's a difficult thing to understand. So the first one of these is there are different models. So the first is the moral model, which blames the abuser for lack of self-control and character, which isn't is something that's used, but it's not technically right. It's what produces that stigma of drug abuse. The next is the disease model, saying that person who abuses drugs requires medical treatment rather than moral exhortation or punishment. So saying that people who are addicted to drugs shouldn't be punished so much as they should be given treatment for it, which is true in itself for some portions. The other is the physical dependence model, which is the withdrawal avoidance model. So people take drugs in order to avoid unpleasant withdrawal symptoms. So symptoms include irritability, racing heart, waves of goosebumps, Basically it's this cause of dysphoria, which is the opposite of the euphoria that you would normally feel. So when people are on heroin and stuff like that, they get this feeling of just lowness and like disdain for their life that causes them to take more. Okay, so the last one is the positive reward model, which is people who abuse drugs then become addicted, and then abused drug provides powerful reinforcement. So there's an area in your brain called the nucleus accumbens, which is the region in the forebrain where dopamine is released, causing the reward system to be triggered when you take drugs. And this causes the user to associate drugs with pleasure, thus seeking out more because we seek the pleasures that we feel. The insula is a region of the brain that is, when damaged in people, makes some people have a little issue in quitting smoking, proving that the VTA and the insula mediate addiction. So the insula works with other areas of the brain to mediate addiction and how we feel about things. So when the insula is removed or not there, or at least damaged, there's little issue. So it's just identifying places of the brain that are similar to that are present in addictive people. So the factors that affect vulnerability to drug abuse, excuse me, are biological factors. So sex is a significant variable. Males abuse more than females. It just happens that way. Other things are heritable traits from your genes, or if your parents suffer from these drug addictions. So if your parents suffer from alcoholism, you're more likely to become susceptible to that. That's not sure if there's actually a gene for that, or if it just happens that living in a home with an alcoholic parent shows this behavior that is then passed down. So it's like a nurture thing that you're nurtured that way. Family situation, again, family breakup, poor relationship with parents, or the presence of an antisocial sibling are associated with drug abuse. So yeah, that's why like it's another nurture thing. When you feel alone, it's a possible thing that could attribute to it. It's sad feelings of sadness where these drugs replace that feeling of sadness with something happy, and then after replacing that feeling, you need to add something to make yourself happy again. Personal characteristics, certain traits such as aggressiveness and poor emotional control are especially associated with drug abuse. So aggressiveness, more likely to do things, and poor emotional control, you can't control your emotions to keep you from doing these drugs or anything like that. Strong educational goals and maturity are associated with a lower likelihood. So if you're driven, you're obviously less likely to take drugs, and if you're more mature, obviously you don't think about that as much. And there's environmental factors like high prevalence of drug use in the community, especially in a peer group, predisposes you towards drug abuse, and it's essentially like people who grow up in bad neighborhoods with gangs and things like that, and where drugs are more common. It becomes more common and more common because you're more likely to do them. And there's this thing called cue-induced drug use, which is the presence of mental stimuli that were present during previous use of the same drug. So then something like a certain area, a certain home, a certain smell could make you want to do them more. They can be prevented and treated in multiple ways. So there's drugs for detoxification, benzodiazepines, which are discussed earlier in the chapter, and drugs that suppress central androgenic activity help reduce withdrawal symptoms. There's agonists or partial agonist analogs of the addictive drugs. So these analogs partially activate the same mechanism of that the addictive drug does, help you wean off of it. So similar to like how a nicotine patch provides less nicotine than a cigarette to wean you off the cigarettes. Antagonists to the addictive drug. Specific antagonists block the effects of the abused drug, so it makes you not feel it as much. But they also produce the worst withdrawal symptoms. They intensify them actually. Medications that alter the drug's metabolism. Patients on disulfiram accumulate acetaldehyde, a toxic metabolite of alcohol that can make them ill, counteracting the reward aspects of alcohol abuse. So it removes that part. Reward blocking medications, ways to block positive reward associated with the dopamine receptors in your brain, and then it reduces the activity of the mesolimbocortical dopamine reward system. So if you reduce the reward system, you reduce the likelihood that the person's going to want to do it. And then there's anti-craving medications that reduce the appetite for the abused substance, like naltrexone or Revia, as it's more commonly called, blocks rewarding aspects of consuming alcohol or other abused drugs in some people. And acamprosate or Campril eases alcohol-associated withdrawal symptoms. So when paired together, it removes the appetite for this abuse, and then with the withdrawal symptoms that you would normally feel, the Campril can actually ease those symptoms. Thank you for watching me another week, or not watching.